It's also not just about forecasting, it's about having the actual answers, right? Like, what is your top 10? What is your top 20 for this specific role? And also, by the way, what do you do after that, right?
Welcome to the All in Recruitment podcast by Manatal, where we explore best practices, learnings, and trends with leaders in the recruitment space. If you like our content, please subscribe to our channels on YouTube and Spotify. Stay tuned for our weekly episodes. I am your host, Lydia, and with us today is Alёna Romanenko, Global Head of Research for Executive Talent Acquisition at Visa. Pleasure to have you with us today, Alёna.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Lydia.
So, Alёna, tell us a little bit about your background. What motivated you to pursue a career in executive talent acquisition, and how did you get involved in the field in the first place?
It was really a conscious decision for me, right, to join that field. I was aware of executive talent acquisition because of my studies. One of my mentors at the University of Vienna in Austria was head of HR for IBM at the time. And so we knew that this is sort of how global companies acquire senior talent. And so for me, when I was approached by a recruiter several years after that, of course, one of the roles they offered was an analyst for the technology, media, and telecom practice for one of the global search firms, Spencer Stuart. But it was an easy choice for me then. I consciously went for it. And in my first executive search job, I was a practice analyst for the EMEA practice with Spencer Stuart, then became an associate and moved to executive search in-house now at Visa. So I've sort of seen both sides of the fence, if you will.
What goes into your role as global head of research? I understand that you're also focused on building a global center of excellence for sourcing and building the in-house competencies, right? So tell us a bit more.
Our research team is part of the broader executive talent acquisition team. And when it comes to Center of Excellence and what that means, there are definitely multiple pillars to that. So there is kind of that foundational sort of operational element, operational excellence element to it. So for example, defining best practices of executive search. To give you a specific example, our team have developed a training that we have now showcased regionally and globally across talent acquisition, more broadly, not just executive talent acquisition. And we are now turning that into a learning pathway, as they call it, with our Visa University, which is sort of an educational arm. There is also a setting of different sort of standards in terms of, timelines, right? Like what is a healthy amount of time across various process stages, right? How is quality of long list and short list defined? Kind of this broader knowledge management piece, right? Like best practices, adhering to them, and kind of ensuring that consistency regionally and globally, right? And we're thinking about, of course, tools. We're talking about platforms, CRM, ATS, external platforms like LinkedIn, Recruiter, and just kind of also utilizing these tools, obviously, to develop our pipelines and can build candidate engagement. So that's kind of the foundational piece, that or pillar, if you will. And there is also, of course, sort of more programmatic work and kind of finding solutions to that, but also succession planning. I would kind of probably sort of point it out separately, because it's about identifying and also mapping the critical skills across the various functions, and then creating diverse talent pools to develop these external slates. And kind of, I would probably call it building proprietary executive talent acquisition intellectual property in order to develop our advisory capability. And, kind of, I guess a new one that came this year only is sort of really integrating and championing the use of artificial intelligence into the routine of search practices, whether it's relatively simple things like, using ChatGPT to summarize hiring manager meetings, or maybe creating some bullet points for a job description. But it can be also more sophisticated things that are sort of really more future, more aspirational. We have our kind of meetings where we think about these kind of things exclusively. So that's also part of that Center of Excellence piece in the programmatic sense.
Right, that's a broad scope that you have there, right? There's so many different elements within those pillars that need execution as well, right? There's planning, and then there's the setting of best practices and the execution. So, where did you start with all these plans?
And this is why I also broke it down, right, into kind of those two pillars for simplicity, because you got to lay the foundations first, and you got to know that this is the best practice. Once that is taken care of, then you start thinking like, okay, what's the next step, right? And you really have to take it step by step, because there is a certain, you can't just take a shortcut to sort of doing succession planning, right? Like there are so many foundational things that need to happen before you do that. So this is why I kind of like broke it down into these things, because like one is at the very, very foundation of it, and then you start building your house on top of it. And if your foundations are sound, you can be as creative with the rest of the design as you'd like to be.
And what stage are you in right now in terms of this whole plan?
Everything I mentioned to you is our reality today. And, we sort of might be, as you can imagine, if we talk about, something as big as succession planning, we might have some regions or some functions that are sort of, I guess, a bit further down the line, just because of, capacity, honestly. Like, let's not look for complex explanations here. But at the same time, we're trying to sort of be very consistent and systematic in how we do this. And, our team is truly global. We also work on, obviously, we have a research team, but we also have recruiters, we have coordinators, right? So we're kind of really working as one team and kind of delivering it as well. We have this sort of one visa expression, deliver as one visa. And that's just kind of, I guess, our motto and our philosophy in how we think about things, how we conceptualize them, but also how we execute them.
Well, what are some trends that you've seen in exec talent acquisition that you find most significant? I mean, we've seen pretty critical past 2 or 3 years, right? And changing demands of candidates, not just candidates, but every level, really.
The first one I will mention is AI and automation, because, one could argue, is it just for exec TA? Is it not, right? It's affecting all of us. And I think it's just being used today, even in these early stages, right, of technology. It's already being used to streamline, to speed up the recruitment process. And, there is such a huge opportunity there to free up the time for proper value add work, which is, I think, everyone's kind of trying to do in their space. And you heard me say that, we're developing, intellectual kind of property, right, for exec TA in order to expand our advisory capability, because like that's the secret sauce for everything, right? Because and maybe in executive talent acquisition more than in other sort of friendly functions, right, in professional hiring or early careers, it's very important to be proactive, right? And the only way to sort of achieve that proactivity in your approach is to free up time from anything that is routine, anything that is manual, into really thinking deeply, understanding, developing relationships, and then kind of leveraging that in order to improve the service and improve candidate experience. And that kind of, I guess, leads me a little bit in a nice segue to another point, that another sort of trend that is sort of employee branding and personalized candidate experience. Because I think part of it is connected to AI, because like that next level of AI and process automation is hyper personalization. It's the opportunity to not only be able very early and very sort of automatically get suggestions on, what skill set, which candidate might be actually a good fit for something. So that kind of like hyper personalization and that really tailored approach, which roles are going to be interesting for this specific subset of your executive talent, right? And just kind of like being able to not waste time on finding these things, but really spend the time in relationships, in understanding your talent, and also in organizing information that about your talent, and then kind of leveraging that to kind of, improve the way the team operates, improve candidate experience, and also weave in that sort of the qualitative bit about, I mentioned employee brand. What is your brand? What is the culture of the company? What are the values? What does the company stand for? And I think there is a huge piece here where we, as an in-house team, probably have a little bit of an advantage over, let's say, an external advisor, right? Because there is the piece, always thinking about the hiring manager and the business, like that we advise them and we show them the best talent. We're not wasting their time. We're really focused on actually providing the answers and being a little bit of that pre-selection mechanism, right? That helps everyone be really, really targeted. The last piece, and I won't dwell on it, but I will mention it because it kind of connects everything that we were talking about. It's succession planning, right? It's kind of continuously refining your efforts. It's, just kind of, leveraging technology like CRM as the backbone for being able to find that talent, but then also being very, very pragmatic to identify your strategically important roles in every region and just working with the business to be like, okay, let's prioritize this again. We might have some capacity restraints, right? But we can deliver, let's say, 5 out of 10 or 8 out of 10 in this timeline. Let's prioritize together and let's get it started. And this, I mentioned that as a trend because this is the future, right? Specifically, maybe in executive talent acquisition, but I really actually think it's a broader point for all of TA, because best practices are best practices, and some of us might have sort of longer cycles, right, just like it is an exec TA, but the principle is the same. And that proactivity, when I talk to my colleagues from professional hiring, that's what they say. They want to be more proactive. Sometimes they cannot, right? And this goes, by the way, I'm not talking specifically about visa here. It's kind of the industry sort of observation. I would put it like this.
And it's a sort of data-driven forecasting that you're doing in order to protect or rather future-proof the business's needs, right, in terms of talent later on. That's what you mean by succession planning and making sure that it's also included into your overall strategy.
Absolutely, yes. But it's also not just about forecasting. It's about having the actual answers, right? Like, what is your top 10? What is your top 20 for this specific role? And also, by the way, what do you do after that, right? This is, this can be, and it can stay at the stage of being sort of a paper exercise, if you will, right? But you can also, of course, take it to the next level with like, let's get to know these people. Right. Let's know them. How about we introduce them to our leaders? Do we organize a fireside chat? Because, maybe this is a more long-term succession planning, right? Or is this actually like, shall they just meet the leader for whom this succession is happening, right? So there are absolutely very different flavors to that, but there isn't just a paper exercise element to it, or there isn't just a data kind of data analytics piece of it, but there is actual, what are the answers to the questions that are asked, asked, or maybe haven't even been asked yet, which is my favorite kind, when you can answer the question that hasn't been asked yet.
Yes, that's right. And these are also applicable to passive candidates, right? Those who are there, those who you've seen, and they may be in the organization as well as outside. So what might be some best practices when it comes to sourcing candidates such as these, right? Passive candidates, those who show potential in-house maybe, and also those who are outside.
There isn't really a secret sauce. I think we all are operating kind of, in a very, fast-paced, and occasionally also volatile environment, right? So it's disruptive, and I think kind of maybe let me almost like set the baseline here, because I would like to answer that kind of from the position of strength that Visa is in, right? And kind of like really acknowledge, how fortunate, for example, we are, or I am, to be answering kind of a question about, challenges and best practices, kind of in an environment where we are a growing and innovating company, right? That is strong enough kind of to really work through those volatile conditions and difficult, market fluctuations and things like that. And kind of, it's a solid ship, right? And how we beautifully survived COVID and, all the things that we've learned in that. Like, there is definitely kind of a huge, I think, gratitude piece that I almost like want to say, put out there, right? But it's how what helps a lot, and I'll come back to the brand, right? It's like, growth, profitability, being a trusted and ethical brand. These are the factors that actually set everyone up for success, no matter what the challenges are in the markets, right? And kind of, it's great to be answering this from a position of strength, but we are working a lot with kind of this complex environment where we have to have a very unique, and I'm probably specifically speaking about global large enterprises, right? Where the combination is so unique, the requirements are so unique and so broad that you need to find the right fit for each role, right? And it's kind of like the search for the proverbial purple unicorn. So but we are looking for someone, who is able to operate in a global metrics, but also possesses strategic thinking, but also commercial acumen, and is a strong people leader, right? And it's just kind of like, and then there is probably on top of that is also like subject matter expertise in specialized functional area, right? And, Visa has a huge portfolio, right? We have commercial money movement, we have value-added services. Like some of these things like really kind of require a lot of industry knowledge as well from talent acquisition professionals. So kind of a best practice is really that sort of learning and education piece, and that curiosity piece that we all need to constantly be learning and just never stop, because in the complex environment that is ever changing, the list of kind of requirements is only getting bigger, and it is part of the it's part of our task as well, is to understand where we need to negotiate, right? And where, maybe we need to push back, and maybe not everything out of the 100 points that we need to have is a priority, right? And how also, how to kind of have a dialogue with the hiring managers about that. But I will say that kind of holistic view of talent is that best practice, right? It's like, it's very important, also how not just talent acquisition works with it, but also how you work, for example, with talent management, on connecting it, on bringing this together, because there is a piece here, sometimes you can't find that purple unicorn. Sometimes you need to grow your own purple unicorn, right? And develop them. And I think there is an element here where you need to work together in partnership and collaboration with talent development and the business, right? Because like, what are we growing? What are we developing? What are maybe some of the risks that we're taking, right? Because how can you be creative and innovative and brave when it comes to developing leaders? Our chief people officer actually does not have a classical HR background. In her past roles, she's our chief general counsel, who was brought in to lead and reimagine the people team globally. She's been very public to say that she isn't an HR person. She, however, is a fantastic, smart, driven leader who is transforming the people team's organization today, and leaning into her strengths of being a transformational leader and being a living example of how organizations can take also bold risks. Hey, could we have hired a chief people officer externally? Yes, we could have. But also we can grow that talent, right? And that kind of constant dialogue, and also not seeing ourselves as talent acquisition leaders and professionals in a silo, right? We are not just trying to fill targets, to achieve targets and fill roles, right? We are actually collaborators first and foremost, who are solutioning to achieve the best outcome possible. And sometimes those answers, just like, hopefully I gave a kind of illustrative example for that, they're not obvious. They're not what is actually within your domain. So you need to be exposed to others in order to actually get to the solution.
And there are all these disruptions that you mentioned, right? It's VUCA ultimately that we're living in. And there are also these technological advancements that we're seeing. AI, as you spoke, and as you mentioned extensively earlier, AI, automation, digital transformation as a business, moving into different business verticals, for instance. How have these elements really influenced, or have they influenced the qualities that you seek in executive leaders?
Absolutely, yes. But I think, kind of the qualities remain the same in terms of what is a great leader, right? But I go back to the point about kind of complexity and that purple unicorn. We are we are the original fintech, okay? So kind of we have always had that sort of digital savviness as a prerequisite kind of point on our list, right? If I think about these things, like you might have seen, it's been obviously publicly announced that, Visa launched the 100 million generative AI ventures initiative. Visa launched artificial intelligence advisory services. The business is there and thinking about these things. And so, of course, kind of that requirement of understanding what the business is doing is just always there. It's not that sort of, do you understand how to operate ChatGPT is now on the list of things, that are important. I think the D&I, I&D is, as sometimes it's called now, I think it's just such an important topic. I mentioned to you, right? And I think a lot of companies are having their own flavor of a D&I challenge. Some industries maybe suffer a little bit more than others. But ultimately, the root cause of this is availability of talent pool, especially niche skills that are kind of limited by default. So, and in the spirit of everything being interconnected, I think there is this big question of, so do you build or do you buy, right? And as we've discussed before, like some of these problems, they cannot just be solved in a silo by talent acquisition, or they shouldn't be. Maybe they could be, but they shouldn't be, right? So there is this collaboration, talent development, talent management. Are we looking at this problem from all directions? And are we investing in our own talent? Are we identifying and filling the skill gap? So I don't know if anyone has figured this out completely in the industry anywhere, but we are dealing with a lot of parts, with historic trends, changing demographic trends, right? Like example with maybe women in engineering, and how kind of there is a really strong pipeline of talent at sort of slightly more junior levels than what the definition is of executive talent acquisition, right? So at Visa, executive talent acquisition starts at VP plus level. And by the way, it doesn't translate across companies. For example, at director and senior director level, even today, we can find so many women that, they are there. If you just like really map out the whole sort of talent pool, they are there, and they are a very strong percentage. It might not be quite 50%, but it's a much higher number than when you look at it at VP plus level. And it's just historically, that's how, what kind of degrees people got and whether women went into engineering, right? And I think it's quite illustrative, this example, but we need to bear that in mind. There is another concept here that I kind of want to highlight, because I think it just helps us to think about things differently. It's that diversity of thought, right? Because it doesn't have to come from any specific sort of dimension of diversity. It doesn't have to be gender. It's really diversity thought. It can be an industry that you hire from, right? Say we work in payments, but we don't exclusively hire from payments or from financial services. Kind of more broadly, we hire from tech, we hire from information services, right? Like there is really kind of breadth and depth to it, and arguably this is kind of a more important kind of point, and like how we solve for this, if we understand it differently, like it reframes the problem a little bit. And I will also say that it's usually D&I or I&D, and that ensuring inclusion and not just focusing on diversity is very pivotal in my mind, because just the fact that you found that talent, that unique talent, and you got them through the door doesn't mean you've set them up for success. So this is where kind of like our job, absolutely, our job as talent acquisition doesn't end here, right? And like, that's why kind of our teams have best practices going, like from sort of pre and post hire referencing, for example, right? We talk to colleagues and kind of really do this piece where what is the support that the leaders joining the organization can get? Are there some ideas that their former colleagues have, their former managers, this kind of this 360 view? How can we help them on board? This is actually part of our efforts that our research team does, and broader exec TA team does, right? That inclusion piece. And so I will kind of end this answering your question with that sort of, proactivity of outreach, right? And kind of, really, you only can solve the diversity challenge if you are out there proactively identifying, engaging, and working with that talent, with diversity of thought in mind. And then, because again, diversity will mean something else. There are some functions where, the kind of the usual gender diversity piece actually should be flipped, right? Because, majority and minority can be defined differently, depending. Yeah. So just kind of having all these things in mind. And I know it's a lot, but it's very important to be able to maintain that perspective and that holistic view in order to, well, do our jobs well, right?
You mentioned a really good point earlier about how talent acquisition, the work doesn't stop at just bringing someone in, right, and getting them into through the door, and then that's it, right? But no, there's also this retention element that goes into that. So what strategies maybe have you found to be particularly successful or useful in terms of thinking about retention strategies, whether it's for executive talent or not?
Well, yeah, no, and you're absolutely right. There is kind of, okay, we attract and we retain. And look, I think it's the piece with talent management and talent development, right? You bring in talent, and we, in our conversations often, in our first conversations with talent, right, we actually ask them, what drives you, what motivates you? Talk to us, because you have to, and talent acquisition in general is in a unique position to actually know. So what is happening with this role? What's the path, right? If you come into this role, like, who could you be, right? Like, what doors does it open internally? And kind of building that understanding in that proactive engagement that you're driving. And, having a dialogue also with the hiring managers, right? It's not just about filling the role. It's like, we ask that question in our hiring manager briefings, right? Like, why should people be excited about this? And where is this going? Like, how, is this your successor? Is this like, who are the main stakeholders and collaborators of this role? Because, well, potentially those are the paths, right, for this person to come in. And as much as you might know that in executive talent acquisition world, like, there is a certain cycle to also kind of a successful sort of a stint, if you will, right, in a role. And it's, I mean, kind of, probably I'm a little bit, it's risky to put a number here, but it's around 3 years, right? It can be longer, it can be shorter, but it's probably around 3 years, because of, like, coming in, assessing, making a plan, and then executing on it, right?
That, yes.
So, right, if you want to say this is actually, we've done this, and you want to kind of really fully own it, you probably need a couple of years. So, kind of, but you need to know, as long as that might sound, you need to know what you're building towards, right? And kind of that piece with working with talent management and development, and including these thinking at the early stage of the person hasn't even started the job, in the job that you're actually discussing with them. But that kind of proactive thinking and that proactive kind of caring approach of, like, so how are we developing this? I think it will serve you well as a TA professional in general, because you understand routes to success. Like some executive search firms, as you might know, they kind of publish this series, right, Routes to Success. What are the paths leading there? Because this will also enable you to be stronger at being able to predict what might work and not, and be much more creative than, just saying, oh, okay, someone has engineering in their title today. That means they might be an engineering professional in the future. And of course, I'm, oversimplifying and making a joke here, but it goes back to the education piece here as well.
What were we talking about? Successful collaboration, right? And you talked about this earlier, being a very pertinent point, I thought, which was making sure that in order for all those pieces to come together, you really need to make sure that your foundational aspect, not just technology, not just the best practice, but really your communication on the day-to-day basis with the people involved in making sure your hire is successful is taken care of. So what makes a successful collaboration between all these stakeholders when it comes to an executive leader, or making a good hire at the executive level?
We have a hybrid approach, right, whereby We have a growing and developing in-house research team, but we also work with agencies, right? And that successful collaboration kind of lies in respecting the choices that have been made and listening to the strategy of the company, and being a true thought partner, right? Like, it's kind of interesting that whether we look at it through this internal lens or external lens, being a true thought partner and a trusted advisor, like, that piece really doesn't change, right, in the process. And if I think specifically about agencies and externally, right, it's kind of them understanding what helps us activate whatever our strategy is, right? On our side, we're very clear and honest when we choose to partner with external stakeholders, and treat each other respectfully and lean in order to be able to navigate any complexities, right? Be it in terms of stakeholder maps and strategic kind of engagement, or even like level of coordination, right? Just really partner properly, provide value at whatever that means. It's a partnership. It's not one versus the other, right? And it's kind of, internal recruiters are experts of visa and what the business needs, and external partners, are experts in headhunting, right? And whether it's done with our research team or with an agency partner, it probably doesn't matter, right? Close partnership and collaboration is the secret.
Yes, yes, indeed. And being timely and being updated with what's happening internally, and probably even moving it into the partner, and making sure that they also hold a little bit of that DNA, that secret sauce of visa with them as they go out there and get the kind of candidates that you want. So finally,
That's right.
Alёna, this is a question I would really like to hear the answer to. What is your favorite or maybe most memorable recruitment or TA story that you'd like to share with the audience?
My favorite recruitment stories, plural, they tend to revolve around scenarios where your proactive relationship with the leaders truly unlocks the power of networks, your networks, their networks, be it through developing a connection with your talent, engaging with them meaningfully, understanding their profile really and truly, their strength, and then staying connected with them until the right role comes along. Or it can be also just getting advice from leaders, like getting their views on top talent in the industry who might be uniquely suited for your role. And you might not know this, but they might have the answer, and but really they will give you that answer if there is a dialogue, if there is trust, right? And those kind of those placements where they were just someone brought them up, right? Like, I share a challenging role that I'm working on, and the leader says, have you thought of that person? And and those placements, they feel so effortless and natural. But well, this to me is where the true magic happens, and those to me are the favorite stories. I'm kind of without naming names here.
Yeah, that forms the backbone that leads to all your favorite stories, isn't it?
Exactly.
That's the base. So thank you so much, Alёna. This has been great. I loved particularly all the different perspectives that you brought to rethinking executive talent acquisition, and really looking at it from a collaborative, from a data perspective, from a long-term perspective even, and really unlocking the value that you get in different partners, as well as the information that you can glean for yourself and continuously learning, right? So thank you so much for your time and your insights, Alёna. I'm sure someone from the audience will want to pick up a conversation with you later after this and would want to know more about you and your company. So where can they find you?
No, yeah, being a recruiter, I think LinkedIn is the place where you can find me 24/7. So just search for my name, Alёna Romanenko, on LinkedIn, and maybe add visa to it. And you'll find me, and we can connect, and offline or online, and it'll be my pleasure. Thank you so much.
And we have been in conversation with Alёna Romanenko, who's a global head of research for executive talent acquisition at Visa. Thank you very much for joining us this week, and remember to subscribe to our channels to stay tuned for more weekly insights from On Recruitment.